Ilara believed her life was built on a single, solid pillar. In a house that never felt like a home, that pillar was Liam. He was her sanctuary, the quiet space where she could finally breathe. The rest of her world was a gilded cage, beautiful on the outside, but cold and empty within. Her father's sprawling suburban house, with its manicured lawn and sterile white walls, was a museum curated by her stepmother, and Ilara was just a misplaced artifact, gathering dust in a corner. The central conflict was a quiet, daily war. It was the way her stepmother, Diana, saved her smiles exclusively for Chloe, her own daughter. It was the way her father, a man who traded his spine for a peaceful second marriage, looked right through her. In this polished, silent battleground, Ilara learned to make herself small, to exist in the margins, her fiery auburn hair a stark contrast to her muted presence. Her art was her first escape. Her small university studio, smelling of turpentine and charcoal, was the only room where her soul could stretch out. Her hands, perpetually smudged with black and gray, told stories her voice never could. They sketched a future far from this place, a life where she wasn't an afterthought. Her second escape was Liam. He saw the fire in her, not just the quiet girl who tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. With him, she wasn't the dramatic daughter or the jealous sister. She was just Ilara. His beat-up sedan felt more like home than her own pristine bedroom. Lately, though, tiny cracks had begun to appear in her carefully constructed peace. A text from Liam would go unanswered for hours, followed by a rushed, slightly too vague excuse. Sorry, got caught up with the guys, he'd say, and she'd force herself to believe him. Because what was the alternative? The money for her art supplies, which came from a small trust her mother had left her, seemed to be dwindling faster than usual. When she mentioned it, her father just sighed, his gaze fixed on the television. Expenses go up, Ilara. You have to be more careful. He didn't offer to look into it. He never did. Diana's passive aggressions became sharper, like tiny needles. That new canvas set must have been expensive, she'd comment, her voice light, but her eyes sharp. Chloe is so good at budgeting for her little projects. Chloe's projects involved new clothes and weekend trips. Ilara's involved her future. She tried to ignore it all, to smooth over the cracks. She told herself she was being sensitive, just like they always said she was. She focused on her art and on Liam holding on to him like a lifeline. He was the one thing they couldn't touch. He was hers. The day it all shattered was the anniversary of her father and Diana's wedding. It was always a tense day, a reminder of the family she'd lost, and the one she'd been forced into. The air in the house was thick with unspoken things. She'd spent the afternoon in her studio, finishing a charcoal portrait of Liam, his smile, his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead. She had captured it all. It was more than a drawing. It was a testament to her safe place. She decided to go home early, to surprise him with it. Maybe they could just drive away, get some cheap pizza, and forget this day ever happened. She clutched the small, framed portrait to her chest as she walked up the driveway. The house was silent, eerily so. No car in the driveway but her father's. That was strange. Liam was supposed to be waiting for her. She pushed the front door open. Hello. Her voice echoed in the cavernous foyer. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the air conditioner. A feeling of unease began to creep up her spine. It was too quiet. She walked through the immaculate living room, her footsteps silent on the plush rug. Everything was in its perfect place. Not a cushion out of line, not a speck of dust on the glass coffee table. It was a showroom, not a home. Then she heard it, a faint sound from upstairs. A soft, rhythmic creak. Her heart began to beat a little faster. It was coming from the end of the hall. From her bedroom. She took the stairs slowly, her hand gripping the cool wood of the banister. Why would anyone be in her room? A dozen innocent explanations flashed through her mind. Her father looking for a book. Diana putting away laundry. But none of them felt right. The sound continued, a low, steady murmur. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. It was cold against her skin. She pushed the door open. and her world splintered into a million razor-sharp pieces. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a desecration. There, tangled in her sheets, on the bed where she dreamed of a future with him, was Liam. Her anchor, her love. And her stepsister, Chloe. The family's radiant, golden child. The small, framed portrait slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a soft crack, the sound of a heart breaking. A gasp escaped her lips, loud in the sudden, suffocating silence. It wasn't a sound of surprise. It was the sound of a soul being ripped in two. They looked up, their faces a blur of shock and guilt. But in that single horrifying moment, Alara knew. Her pillar had crumbled. Her sanctuary was gone. She wasn't standing in her bedroom, she was standing in the ruins of her entire life. Time seemed to freeze, Liam scrambling for the sheets, his face pale with shock. Chloe, pulling the duvet to her chin, her expression shifting in a fraction of a second from guilt to a calculated, teary-eyed panic. The air grew thick, unbreathable. Alara's mind couldn't form a complete thought, only fragments. Good, my bed. My sister, my Liam. Chloe was the first to speak, her voice a weaponized quiver. Alara, it's not what you think. The lie was so absurd, so insulting, it snapped something inside Alara. Not what I think. Her own voice was a stranger's, a low, guttural sound that vibrated with a pain she didn't know she could contain. You're in my bed. With him. What else is there to think? Liam just sat there, mute, a coward drowning in the mess he'd made. But Chloe, a master of her craft, was already weaving her narrative. Tears began to stream down her face. He came to me. He said you two were fighting, that you were being so difficult lately. I was just trying to comfort him. The sound of the front door opening downstairs, followed by her father's booming laugh, sent a jolt of ice through Alara's veins. Diana's lighter voice joined his. They were home. The confrontation spilled out of the bedroom and into the hallway, a chaotic storm of accusations and sobs. When Diana and her father saw the scene, Alara trembling with rage, Chloe wrapped in a robe, weeping hysterically, they saw exactly what Chloe wanted them to see. Diana rushed to her daughter's side, enveloping her in a protective embrace. What did you do to her? She snarled, her eyes fixed on Alara. Me? What did I do? Alara's laugh was a brittle, broken thing. Ask her. Ask him. But the verdict had already been decided. Chloe, sobbing into her mother's shoulder, painted Alara as a hysterical, jealous monster who had burst in and attacked her. Her father stood by, his face a mask of weary disappointment, the same look he always gave her. The look that said, "Why must you always cause trouble?" "You're always so dramatic, Alara," Diana scoffed, her voice dripping with contempt. "You can't stand to see your sister happy for 1 second. You're tearing this family apart." Alara turned to her father, her last hope. "Dad, please, look at them. They were in my room, my bed." Her voice cracked, pleading for him to see her, just once. He looked from his weeping stepdaughter to his own flesh and blood. He chose peace. He chose the path of least resistance. His voice, when he finally spoke, was cold, distant, and final. "We can't have this chaos in our home. Pack a bag. You need to leave." In one night, she lost everything. The boy she loved, the sister she tolerated, the father she craved, and the house that was never a home. They tucked the perpetrators back into the family's warm embrace while casting her out onto the street. The first few days were a blur of grief, spent on the lumpy, worn-out sofa of her university friend Maya. The world outside the dusty apartment window felt distant, unreal. Grief was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that made it hard to breathe, to think, to exist. She didn't paint. Her hands, usually covered in charcoal and life, were clean and still. One morning, staring at her hollowed-out reflection in Maya's cracked bathroom mirror, something shifted. She saw the dark circles under her eyes, the paleness of her skin, the haunted look of a victim, and the sorrow began to curdle into a cold, hard fury. They hadn't just kicked her out. They had tried to erase her truth, to paint her as the villain in a story where she was the only one who had been wronged. She wouldn't be a silent victim. Her strategy wasn't revenge, it was revelation. She knew their weakness, the family's one true god, their public image. Diana's perfectly curated life, her father's reputation, Chloe's golden child status. It was all built on a foundation of lies. And Alara was going to pull out the support beams. Her mind, once foggy with pain, was now sharp, focused. She started digging. She remembered a shared cloud account, long forgotten. There, she found it. A video, taken by one of Chloe's friends months ago. Chloe, laughing, bragging about how easy it was to wrap Liam around her finger, and how she'd been siphoning money for months from a college fund their father had set up for both of them. The pieces clicked into place. The dwindling art supply money. Her father's dismissiveness. It wasn't just an affair. It was a long, calculated deception. She spent the next week meticulously gathering evidence. Screenshots of venomous texts Chloe had sent about her. Damning bank statements showing extravagant purchases, trips, and clothes, all from an account that was supposed to be for her future. She was no longer fighting for a home she didn't want or a family that didn't love her. She was fighting for the one thing they couldn't take from her, the truth, and she knew exactly when and where she would reveal it. The day of the annual charity garden party arrived under a sky of blinding, indifferent blue. It was Diana's magnum opus, the yearly performance where she cemented her status as a community pillar. The sprawling backyard was a fantasy of white linen, blooming hydrangeas, and the gentle clinking of champagne flutes. Laughter, light and curated, drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of freshly cut grass and expensive perfume. This was their kingdom, built on appearances. Alara watched from her car, parked a block away. She wasn't dressed for a party. She wore simple black jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, her fiery hair pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense ponytail. She looked like a stagehand, not a guest. In her lap was a small, powerful laptop. On the passenger seat, a simple USB drive. It felt heavier than a stone. She took a deep breath, the air conditioning blasting against her clammy hands. This wasn't about revenge. It was about a correction, a public edit of a story they had tried to write for her. She slipped in through a side gate left ajar for the caterers, her presence a quiet shadow against the vibrant pastels of the guests. No one noticed her. She was, as always, invisible in her father's house. She moved with a calm, calculated purpose toward the large white tent where a projector screen was set up, cycling through a pleasant slideshow of smiling children from the charity. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath her composed exterior. She found the technician's table, momentarily unattended. Her fingers didn't tremble. She slid the USB drive into the port. A few clicks. A file uploaded. A new slideshow queued. It was done in less than 20 seconds. She then melted back into the small crowd gathering for Diana's speech, positioning herself near the side of the tent, just out of direct sight but with a clear view of the screen and her family. Diana stepped up to the microphone, radiant in a cream-colored dress, her smile as bright and brittle as porcelain. Her father stood beside her, beaming with pride. Chloe and Liam were nearby, a picture of youthful devotion, holding hands. They looked so perfect, so happy. The lie was breathtaking. "Thank you all for coming," Diana began, her voice smooth and practiced. "When we talk about community, we're really talking about family, about the values we hold dear. Honesty, integrity, and the unwavering trust that forms the foundation of everything we build." Alara's hand tightened into a fist at her side. "Trust, Duraques, crustolers." As Diana continued, waxing poetic about protecting our children and, quote, leading by example, Alara quietly pulled out her phone. She opened a simple remote control app connected to the laptop. Her thumb hovered over the screen. "It is our integrity," Diana said, her voice swelling with false emotion. "That defines us." That was the cue. Alara pressed play. The screen behind Diana flickered. The image of a smiling child vanished. It was replaced by a video, grainy, shot on a phone, but the audio was crystal clear. It was Chloe, laughing with a friend. "He's so wrapped around my finger," she was saying, tossing her hair. "And The college fund? Dad never checks the statements. Ilara's art supplies are basically paying for my trip to Cancun. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Diana paused, a flicker of annoyance on her face, assuming a technical glitch. Then, the next slide appeared. A screenshot of a text message from Chloe to Liam. She's so dramatic. Just ignore her. I'll see you tonight. Use the back door. Diana's smile froze. Her father's face went slack with confusion, then dawning horror. The slideshow continued, a silent, relentless assault of truth. Bank statements, with Chloe's lavish purchases highlighted in red, more texts. A picture of Liam and Chloe, dated weeks before the day Ilara found them, their arms wrapped around each other. The polite chatter died completely. The air grew thick and heavy. All that could be heard was the gentle whir of the projector, and the sound of dozens of people holding their breath. Every single eye was glued to the screen. Then, Ilara stepped forward from the shadows. She didn't have a microphone, but her voice, calm and clear, cut through the suffocating silence. "This," she said, gesturing to the screen, "is the integrity my stepmother speaks of. This is the foundation of trust." Diana spun around, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "Ilara, how dare you!" Ilara ignored her, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the guests, the people whose approval her family craved more than anything. "They called me a liar," she continued, her voice steady, though her heart felt like it might burst. "They called me hysterical. They threw me out of my home to protect this perfect image." She looked directly at her father, whose face had crumpled into a canvas of shame and regret. They chose the beautiful lie over the ugly truth. The final image appeared on the screen. It was the charcoal portrait of Liam she had drawn, the one that had shattered on her bedroom floor. A crack ran right through the glass, splitting his smile in two. "I'm not here for an apology," Ilara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried across the silent lawn. "I'm just here to set the record straight." Chaos erupted. Diana was shrieking, Chloe was sobbing, and her father stood paralyzed. Guests were whispering, pulling out their phones, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. The perfect garden party had become a public execution. Ilara didn't stay to watch the fallout. She turned her back on the wreckage of their lives, and she walked away. The side gate clicked shut behind her, muffling the sounds of their implosion. As she walked down the quiet, tree-lined street back to her car, the suffocating weight that had lived in her chest for months began to dissolve. It was a strange, hollow feeling, a terrifying freedom. She had burned the final bridge. She had nothing left of the life she once knew. She was completely, utterly alone. But for the first time in a very long time, she could finally breathe. 18 months later, the sterile white walls of her father's house were a distant, faded photograph. Ilara's world was now a small, sun-drenched studio apartment that smelled of fresh coffee and oil paint. Sunlight streamed through a large, paint-splattered window, illuminating the beautiful chaos of her new life. Canvases leaned against every wall, some finished, others a work in progress. Her hands were still smudged, but not with the muted grays of charcoal. They were stained with vibrant blues, deep reds, and brilliant yellows. The colors of a life being lived, not just survived. The fallout from the garden party had been swift and brutal. The stories spread through their manicured suburb like wildfire, shattering the family's pristine image. But Ilara hadn't stuck around to watch the blaze. She'd gone back to Maya's couch, and the next day she had started building. She took a part-time job at a coffee shop, saving every dollar. She poured her pain, her rage, and her eventual fragile hope onto canvas. She started an online portfolio, then an Etsy shop. The first sale was for $50. She cried when the notification came through. It wasn't about the money, it was proof that she could create something of value, all on her own. One evening, months after the party, an anonymous email had landed in her inbox. The subject line read, "You think you know the whole story, you don't." Attached was a grainy photo of two young women, smiling, arms around each other like the best of friends. One was her mother. The other was Diana. A chill had crept down her spine. The email was a key, promising to unlock a darker, more complicated story. a history of secrets that predated her own pain. For a moment, the old Ilara was tempted to turn the key, to dive back into their world of lies. But then she looked around her tiny apartment, at the paintings that were hers, at the peace she had fought so hard to build. She dragged the email to the trash folder and emptied it without a second thought. Their story was no longer hers to carry. Now, her part-time job was a memory. Her art was her life. She took commissions, sold prints online, and was even featured in a local gallery showcase for emerging artists. She wasn't rich, but she was independent. Every bill paid, every tube of paint bought, was a small, quiet victory. She had friends, real ones, who celebrated her successes and sat with her on the floor eating pizza when a painting just wasn't working. She was learning that a support network wasn't a single pillar you leaned on, but a foundation you built with others, piece by piece. Her phone buzzed on the cluttered workbench. An unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Ilara? The voice was hesitant, heavy with the weight of unspoken years. It was her father. She didn't speak, just listened to the sound of his breathing on the other end. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, he finally managed. Diana and I were separated. Chloe moved out, it's all a mess. He sounded small, pathetic. He was looking for absolution, for her to fix something he had allowed to break. The old Ilara would have felt a pang of pity, a pull of obligation, but the woman standing in the sunlight of her own studio felt only a calm, quiet finality. I'm sorry to hear that, Dad, she said, and she meant it. But it was the detached sympathy you'd offer a stranger. I have to go. I have a deadline. Wait, he pleaded. Can we just talk? Maybe have dinner? She looked at the vibrant, unfinished canvas in front of her, a portrait of a woman with fiery hair, her face turned toward the sun. I don't think that's a good idea, she said, her voice gentle but firm. I'm not angry anymore, Dad. I'm just done. She ended the call before he could reply. She hadn't done it out of spite. She had done it out of self-preservation. She had finally learned that some doors are meant to be closed, not so you can forget what's behind them, but so you can focus on the path ahead. She picked up her brush, dipped it in a bright, defiant orange, and added a streak of sunlight to the canvas. The life they had almost broken was now her masterpiece. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was strong. It was hers. Sometimes, everything has to be torn down to the ground. Every wall, every pillar, every carefully constructed lie. And in the terrifying, empty space that's left, you find that you are not standing in ruins. You are standing on cleared ground, with nothing but the freedom to build your own life, exactly the way you want it to be. Comment what country you're watching this video from, and if you want to hear more stories of courage and rebirth, subscribe to the channel.